Thank you for coming. Thank you to FPWR for giving me this opportunity. As Susan said, I am a parent. I'm also a professional. I was involved in the field of special ed and applied behavior analysis a long time before I was a parent. So I was kind of one of the lucky ones that had a little bit of a toolbox before we got the Prader-Willi bombshell laid on us. However, the process of having a son with Prader-Willi syndrome and doing what I do with applied behavior analysis has taught me more than I can really ever explain. And so I'm really glad that I'm able to start using what I've learned in our house we're like, oh, the way I should be doing things and the way they taught me at school, it's not working. I'm going to try it a different way. Using the science, tried a little different, got way more success, started talking to other parents, other professionals in the Prader-Willi field, realizing, ooh, there's something about Prader-Willi syndrome and behavior that makes my application of ABA a little bit different, and it's really important. And I would really like to reach out and make sure all professionals know that. And as Susan said, currently I work in a public school system as a consultant. I have worked in homes. I have worked as a special ed teacher in a public school. I've worked in a private school for students with autism. So obviously you'll hear ABA and autism go hand in hand. So that was really my big kind of knowledge base, but I have worked with all disabilities, birth to 21 pretty much in a variety of settings. I do also have another son. He's just about 8, and he tests my skills, I think, more than my son who has Prader-Willi syndrome, because there's pieces of Prader-Willi syndrome that make some things a little bit easier. So that's a little bit about that. So what we're going to do today is we're going to understand, my mission here is to help people understand what is ABA, what is it not, and dispel a lot of myths that are out there. There's a lot of, I'm kind of on this crusade to kind of get rid of the bad ideas of what ABA is and answer some questions at the end and hopefully clear some stuff up. We're gonna talk about the ABCs of behavior, who and where, so who can implement ABA and where can it be done, and then what is this thing called an FBA, which is a functional behavior assessment. And I'm gonna go through that a little bit. Later, the second talk that Tony Chambers is doing, he's going to talk a little bit more about specific to the educational system, so it will apply more within the US educational system, and he's going to talk some about the laws as well, not just, so this will be a little bit more about the behavior and the science, and hopefully I'm going to give you guys some take-home tips and a toolbox when you leave from here. And I did come up with a lot of this information from the lovely world of Facebook. Lots of questions. I started seeing a lot of the same concerns that parents were saying, and in my head I'm thinking, there's some simple answers to these. I can't believe their school systems aren't telling them this, or I can't believe somewhere along the line they didn't find this information out. So a lot of this information came from you guys and from what I saw was kind of needed. So what is ABA? So like Susan says, it stands for Applied Behavior Analysis. So ABA is not a simple set. It is not one thing. It's a scientific problem-solving approach that's aimed at producing socially significant behavior change. Sounds good, right? You want everyone to be able to do things better. So ABA it's not an affiliation with anything specific. It's an umbrella term, and there's tons of offshoots underneath, but they have some guiding principles. So I'm going to teach you guys about those guiding principles. So here's some myths. Can you guys raise your hand, anyone who's just heard of ABA or applied behavior analysis? You've kind of heard the term. Okay. Has anyone had a really good experience with applied behavior analysis? Okay, how about a not good experience? I know they're out there. No? Okay, well that's good. Yes, thank you, because I know that there's some out there. Things are good and bad. Then there's a lot of myths out there. So a lot of people think, I'm not sure what happened to my not equal sign there, but it's supposed to say discrete trial or table time work does not equal ABA. So like I said, ABA is a set of principles. I'm going to show you what the 7 dimensions are. Those are the guiding guidelines. If you have a program that is implementing applied behavior analytic techniques, these 7 things should be happening, or it's not applied behavior analysis. So it's this guideline, it's this idea of things. A quality program, an ABA program, will be a combination of teacher and student-led activities. It can be at a table, it can be at a desk, it can be in a group, it can be one-on-one, and it should also be out in the natural environment. It should be on the rug, it should be in the, if you're at home, out in the backyard, at school, in the recess yard. It should be happening everywhere all of the time. In the 70s, Ivar Lovaas did the first kind of breakthrough study, and he used this discrete trial, this table time, to show that he could teach students with autism to learn and keep skills at a really rapid rate. And he did this study and he published it, and they were getting this 40 hours a week of this table time work. So that's where it started, and that was the beginnings of applied behavior analysis and working with students. And students we thought that maybe couldn't learn really can, and they can learn fast if you do it the right way. So it started there, and it's just evolved. Even in the past 10 years, it has evolved so much in the implementation. So that's kind of where that idea comes from, thinking that ABA is at a table. It can be used for all ages. It is not just for preschool kids. It is not just for little babies. It is for adults. It is for children. It is for my husband. It is for my kids. It is just people. It's all ages. And it can be used across diagnoses, with or without. It's based on the principles of human learning. It's not based on autism. What happens is kids with autism learn in a really specific way. So then ABA worked really well for them. So then people thought ABA equals autism, that's it. But that's not true. It can work for everyone because, as you're going to see, it's highly flexible and highly adaptable, which is the beauty of what a true ABA program is going to be. So don't let them say, well, your kid doesn't have autism, or it doesn't work for Prader-Willi syndrome, or it doesn't work for, ADHD, anxiety. It can be anything. It can be used to teach anything. You can teach academic skills, social skills, behavioral work, self-help life skills, you name it, it can be taught. And this is another big myth, and especially when you're looking at Prader-Willi syndrome, well, some people will say, stay away from ABA. They give everyone M&Ms. They say, sit down, here's an M&M, clap your hands, here's an M&M, touch red, good for you, go eat some Twizzlers. So again, years ago, that was how it worked. And the truth is, for a lot of students with some pretty significant disabilities, in the hierarchy of needs, food's at the bottom of it. For some students, food is the only motivating reinforcer for them because of where they are. However, you don't have to use food at all. And really the trend currently with ethics and obesity and sugar and everything we know, the trend is to be moving away from food reinforcers. They're really only used very early on, or if there's nothing else there, and we use the food to then teach them to like other things. So don't let that be a reason that somebody says, well, you can't do ABA with your kid with Prader-Willi. So some hallmarks that set applied behavioral analysis apart from other interventions: decisions are made based on what we see. So if I see something happen, if I know like my kid's in a store and he throws himself on the ground, he starts screaming, I'm not gonna be like, oh, he's so sad and I've gotta make him happier, and I'm not gonna make any assumptions on what's going inside. Applied behavioral analysis doesn't mean that there's no emotions. We know there's emotions. Everybody has them, and they definitely affect our behavior. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But I can't prove that to you. I can only prove to you that every time there's a math sheet, the kid slaps me. That's all I can tell you. Unless he's actually saying like, oh, I feel anxious because my heart's racing. If he can verbalize that, then I can go on that. But all I know is if I give him a math sheet, he's going to smack me. So what can I do about changing the environment to change the smacking? Everything's scientifically proven. The techniques we use are sound, they're based on literature, so those are the ones we're going to use. And again, we want to teach socially significant behaviors, and that's different for every person. So that's the beauty of it as well. For some people, that means growing up, holding a job, and just integrating into society like everyone else. And for some other students that I work with, I know that it means, they're going to go and work in a supported environment. Like I know for my son, we're going to be looking at a small workshop. We're going to be looking at small supported things with somebody helping him all the time. And so we're going to teach him those skills to be necessary in that environment, because that's what's going to be good for him. Here are the 7 dimensions. I'm not going to go through them but I just want you to see what they are. So the first dimension of ABA is that what we're doing, generalization. Everything we're teaching can be done out in the natural environment. I don't care if the kid can count to 753 if he can't go to a store and give me a $5 bill. So if he can identify a $5 bill at the table, we're then going to set up a little store in the classroom. We're then going to do trips to the store to make sure he can use a $5 bill. I haven't done my job till that skill goes from the table or from the classroom to the natural environment. They're effective. So data, data, data. I am a data nerd. I love data. Everyone I work with is just like, they just laugh about it. So interventions are monitored and everything's based on data. The procedures are technological, which means that they're based on research. And they're described clearly and concisely. So basically, any program that a student is doing, you should be able, like if your child has an ABA program, you should be able to read the intervention protocol and you should be able to implement it because it is so specific. We are long-winded people. We like details, but it's good. They're applied, so they're socially significant. Things are conceptually systematic. So again, we're using interventions that you can find in the literature. There's data, and our behavior is observable and measurable, and I'm going to go into this a little bit too. This is another thing, you can give me one type of behavior, and I can probably write an entire page to define like the behavior of spitting, to make it super observable and measurable. But you got to see it, you got to count it. So behavior, from my lens, from my behavior analytic lens, when I say behavior, I mean anything a person does that creates a change in the environment. A lot of times people hear behavior and they think the bad stuff. Behavior equals hitting, behavior equals running away, behavior equals stealing food. Well, what I'm doing right here is behavior because you could, while I'm talking, you could measure the change in the tension in my lips, the change in my vocal cords. You could measure the airwaves changing. So that's something that you can measure and you can define it. You can define the decibels that I'm talking in. So behavior can be something we want to increase, something we want the child or person to keep doing, or something we don't want them to do. And so we can use behavior analysis to increase the good things, which in turn will decrease the bad things. And so this guy, Patrick Fryman, I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with him. He does a lot of work out at Boys Town. He's fabulous. He does a lot of work on anxiety. And if you can ever get a chance to hear him present, I highly recommend it. He's a great presenter. He's really fun to listen to, and his information is fabulous. So he talks about, in terms of behavior, emotion is not satisfactory to explain behavioral events. So if a child's running away and crying, I'm not going to say they're anxious. That's not my answer. They might be, but as a behavior analyst, I can't use anxiety as a reason to explain the behavior. We've got two types of behaviors. So we've got public events, which are the easy ones, the things we can observe someone else doing. We can observe someone running away. We can observe someone talking. Now, there's also these things called private events, which are much harder. They're internal for the person. So for people with Prader-Willi syndrome, this is a really important thing that if you're working with a school team and if you're really working with a behavior analyst, that they learn and understand the effect of private events on behavior for people with Prader-Willi syndrome. This is going to be one of your bigger variables that are going to cause behavior problems or be the root of it. They're also the hardest ones to figure out because we can't see them. We can't measure them. We could measure them if we knew, but you're not going to go inside with stuff and measure brain stuff and stomach stuff. And the events can co-occur. But there's public events, there's private events, and they can affect behavior. And we're going to talk more about that as we go on. So if anyone's had any experience with ABC or with behavior analysis, we have our ABCs, this 3-turn contingency. This is like the heart and the guts of what applied behavior analysis is. So this is a way of thinking. This is something that you guys can all learn to do and you can implement. So I'm also not here to say that every kid with Prader-Willi should have a really strict ABA program. That is not what I am saying, and I don't want anyone to get that takeaway message. I want people to understand what it is. You can decide if your child would need it, but the bottom line is this ABC way of thinking, whether your kid has an ABA program or not, this every day, all the time, what do I do in the store? My kid's having a meltdown. How do I get my kid to talk more? This is the way of thinking to attack that. And again, if you have other children, it's applicable to all of them. So we've got the antecedent, which is what happens immediately before. It's observable. It's that immediately before. Then we've got the behavior, and then we've got the consequence. So the consequence here doesn't mean punishment. It's just what happens next. So this ABC is what we use to figure out what to do. Like people call me up and say, this kid in this classroom is throwing papers, or somebody calls and it's like, I don't know I want my kid to listen more. We need to look at this to figure it out. Then there's these things called setting events. These are huge in Prader-Willi syndrome, like huge. And this is another thing that you really need to advocate and explain and make sure your team really appreciates and understands the effects of setting events on Prader-Willi syndrome. So setting events, generally speaking, are things that happen not immediately before the behavior. So for example, Put down the math sheet, the kid hits you, you take the math sheet away, right? But what you don't know is maybe earlier in the morning, so the setting event, earlier in the morning, the bus was late and there was a different bus driver. So we know our kids have a hard time with change, the schedule's off, they get to school late. Any of us, we're going to walk into work, we're going to be frazzled. So the student comes in frazzled, that setting event is going to make it more likely that that child's going to engage in whatever problem behavior they have because their threshold's already up a little bit higher. So Prader-Willi syndrome in and of itself, when you talk about food, is going to be a setting event because we know diagnosis of Prader-Willi syndrome, we know that they're going to be thinking about food, and we know any presence of food is going to affect their behavior. So like the idea of knowing there's a party at the end of the day where there's going to be a cake, good luck, teacher, good luck. Just take that into account, and if you need to schedule an easy day that day, or you have the party at 8:30 a.m. and be good. But that setting event, you need to take into account. So what I'm going to do now is use this little vignette, and I'm going to show you and kind of walk you through how you can use this ABC process, how it's meant to be used. So we've got Billy. He has Prader-Willi syndrome. He's 4 grade levels below in math. So whenever his teacher asks him to take out his math work, he argues. Nobody with Prader-Willi argues, right? No, not at all. So he argues. And he continues to argue, and then the teacher just moves on and says, you have to do this later for homework. However, Billy never does homework either. Probably pretty... So what you do is we think about the behavior. So the behavior that we have here was his arguing, right? So we have his arguing. Immediately before he argued, he was told to do math. He was given a math sheet. And then the consequence was the math sheet was removed. Told to do math, argued, math sheet was taken away. Pretty simple, probably happens a lot, easier to avoid. So now what we're going to do is look at these 3 and figure out how should I intervene in the future. So how did the antecedent affect Billy's behavior? Well, it was the math sheet. She didn't warn him. We don't hear anything about warnings. We don't hear anything about choices. Here you go. And then, he argued. And then, the consequence, he didn't have to do the math sheet. So what's going to happen the next time he's given math? He's going to argue because he got the math sheet taken away. So that consequence is strengthening the fact that he's going to continue to argue, and then it's going to spill over into anything he doesn't want to do. He just knows the longer I talk, these people are going to eventually walk away. And my mom doesn't make me do homework, so I argue with her too. So arguing's fun. And then we have the setting events that need to be considered. So in this little vignette, we said that he's 4 grade levels below in math. It's highly likely that that is a big reason and a factor that's contributing to the arguing behavior and wanting to escape the work. So when we sit down, we think about that, we're like, we need to modify the math work. Just by modifying the math work, we may get rid of the behaviors. That's in a perfect world, but you've got to take that into account. Go ahead.
Share something? So you could replace Billy with Dante. It's the exact same thing. And what we discovered is that the level of the math that he was doing, you guys hear me? The level of the math that he was doing, it's okay, my voice is
Okay, you can scream.
The level of the math that he was doing was actually not his level. And they were giving him sheets that were too easy.
Yeah, it can go both ways.
Right, and so he was like, why are they giving me these sheets that are too easy? And he was starting to argue, and it wasn't until we discovered that the antecedent was the programming of the math. And a lot of teachers don't necessarily understand the antecedent, and there's always an antecedent. And that's the problem. So when you're talking to your schools and your teachers, you can say, well, let's figure out what the antecedent is, and then we can solve the problem. Because if you can't figure that part out, that's so important, you can't solve the problem.
Yep.
So this is a great example.
Oh, good.
ABC is amazing.
Oh, good. I can't take credit for the ABC. I wish I could. But it's a really important tool. And we're going to talk a lot about antecedents. And you make a good point about it being too easy. It can go both ways. A lot of times we underestimate, and then they're like, I'm bored. Okay, so we went through that. So essentially, he escaped the demand of doing work, right? So Billy got to escape work. So there's 4 reasons that anybody does anything. We all have a motivation for our behavior. One reason is for social attention. Now, this can be social attention, praise, high five, song and dance. It can also be scolding. It can be that punishment. It can be that you're not supposed to do that. Why are you arguing with me? You have to do math to grow up and have a good job. Especially with people with Prader-Willi syndrome, I'm sure you've all seen, attention is tension. It doesn't matter what it is. I can even tell you with my son, we've found how strong the attention component is. He, is doing his thing, and we put him in his room as kind of like a timeout, shut the door, make it sound like we're walking away. He stops, he drops to the floor, and he looks for our shadow. If he can see our shadow outside, he stands back up and continues his fun little whatever he's doing. If we actually walk away, you hear him drop, no shadow, he stops. That attention component, that was like, whew, you think I got out of the room, I'm not giving them attention anymore? It's also really hard in school systems. We legally can't leave kids alone. We can never fully remove attention. And I know for me personally, and even in the job I do, it's hard. Like, we'll say to parents, I know what the problem is. I can't leave them alone. It's not safe. I can't. So we do. But that's really important for school staff to understand, that your explanation of the right and the wrong, and even you telling them, no, don't do it, it is reinforcing their behavior, and they like it. So it's really important. We do things to escape or avoid, to get out. We don't want to do something. We can do behavior because we want something. Obviously, Prader-Willi will see lots of behaviors to get food, but it could be for other things, for an actual item or activity. And then sensory stimulation. So this behavior, a lot of people think autism, kind of stereotypical, where the students might flap their hands or walk on their toes. But students with all different disabilities will do it. That we get massages for sensory reasons. We listen to music for sensory stimulation. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. So it's all about figuring out what the sensory stimulation is and making it more appropriate. But this behavior is a really hard one. Skin picking, right? Probably a big piece of this, which is so hard to get rid of, because we have to find something outside of their body that competes with how exciting that internal feeling is of flipping the books and the pages or skin picking. So finding that motivation is the first step. You can't change behavior unless you know why they're doing it. That's the most important part. Anytime somebody tells me something, the teachers know, all right, you're going to ask me all of these questions. You're going to say, what does it look like? When does it happen? How long does it happen? Because I can't answer a question until we figure out the behavior. Because you want to respond based on function. So what does that mean? So if they are engaging in arguing in order to get attention, then you need to withdraw or minimize the attention. You need to make the behavior ineffective. Now, with the attention piece, what's important is you want to ignore the behavior, but not the child. I see this in schools a lot, where students might, throw a paper a little bit, and they might start saying, this is stupid, I don't want to do it. So the teacher walks away and says, I'm just going to put him on ignoring, and I'm just going to let him go. Well, he goes for 2 hours, because he's also getting to escape all the work, and he's practicing. Now desks are being flipped and scissors are being thrown, because he's also getting out of the work. So you're going to ignore the behavior. You're not going to pay direct attention. Don't throw that paper. You're going to pay attention to what you want. So they throw the paper, you're going to give them some sort of incompatible thing. We're going to do it on a whiteboard. Students love it. They rip their papers in half. A lot of the teachers will have 30 copies there because they know it's a ripper, and they just pull another one on the desk, and they put another one on the desk. And we don't even have them cleaning up the papers because they're enjoying the attention and the feedback of cleaning the classroom up of the mess they just made. So you want to not pay attention to the throwing of the paper, pay more attention to what they should be doing. If they want preferred items, don't give it to them. If it's possible for that item to be delivered later, say they want to play the iPad, but they can have it just not right then, you can tell them first this, then that, so they know when it's coming. Kind of preventatively, you're just going to teach better communication skills to replace the inappropriate behavior, the grabbing, the reaching, the crying, teach them to request in whatever way, shape, or form. If they're trying to escape, you're going to keep the demand on them, so you're not going to remove it. So like in Billy's example, you're going to keep the math sheet there. You're going to keep it there. You may need to sometimes break it down a little bit and maybe only have them do half the page, and you kind of be sneaky about it and be like, oh, you know what? Make it on your terms, not, oh, you don't want to do it, you only have to do half. I forgot. My lesson plan here says we're only supposed to do 2. And then you fold the paper in half and they do 2. So the students, you're still looking like you're in control, but you're changing the demand so they can actually get it done. And then you can bring the work back in chunks of 2, so then the work eventually does get done. And then if it's for automatic reinforcement, if it's a behavior they could engage in at another time, so my son, for example, he loves receipts. He likes the way they feel. He likes the way they sound. He loves a good receipt, which is really nice because when we go to a store, he behaves and he gets the receipt. And it's really easy. And there have been times where I've had to buy things just because he was really good to get the receipt, not even for the item. But we learned over time, he'll sit there with the papers, he's talking to himself, and he plays store, but you can't really hear him. But he's rubbing it all over his face, and it really excites him. So he's allowed to have the receipt for a limited period of time. So he gets the receipt when we get in the car, and he hands it to me when we get out. No receipts any other time of the day. Because if it were up to him, he would be kind of doing it all the time, and it would really interfere with the rest of his life. He wouldn't want to interact with people, and it really excites him, and then it can lead into other things. So he's kind of got a time and a place that he can do this. And it's not around other people because it can look kind of odd what he's doing, and it doesn't really help his case if I let him walk around the store doing that. So we keep it in the car, we're good. And then sometimes it's just a function of they don't know what else to do. They need to be taught other things. So on the front end, you're going to teach them to engage in other stuff. So you limit how much they do this behavior, and then you're teaching them what is it about this that they like, and how can we teach them to do other things. So just give them more skills. So as a summary, in order to change behavior, first you need to make it ineffective. So for Billy, it needs to be ineffective at escaping the work. So we're going to ignore his behavior. We're not going to ignore him. We're going to keep the work there. And he's not going to go anywhere or do anything until the work's done. And then during the good times, when he's happy and listening, we're going to program for ways for him to learn to ask for breaks. Maybe, a whole worksheet is too much, and he's allowed one break card for every work period. Or just to ask for help. A lot of kids just don't know how to ask for help. Or we're going to alter the way we present it. We're going to give him choices. Do you want to do the red sheet or the blue sheet? Teacher already has it prepared. It's the same work. It just looks different, but he's got a little bit of control. And we're going to catch him being good. This is a hard one because sometimes people feel like, yay, you're breathing. I'm good job. Like I'm giving them, rewards for breathing. But here's the thing, if we're giving them attention when they're throwing the worksheet or being inappropriate, and we're ignoring them when they're doing what they should be doing, we're not teaching them anything. What we're teaching them is we pay attention to you when you throw things. But I know sometimes, I'll be guilty of it. I'm like, oh my gosh, I just got 30 minutes and I'm cleaning the house and both of my kids aren't fighting. I'm not going to say anything. But then they start fighting and then I walk in and start yelling. And then I'm like, yeah, I just did everything I shouldn't be doing. So when they are fighting, you should be just even yelling from the other room, hey, I love how you guys are playing, or just any type of attention. You don't even have to be praising them for that behavior. It can just be like, oh, that's a cool show you're watching. That's a cool game you're playing. But they're getting attention in some form. And then it should hopefully decrease the need to engage in those other behaviors. So I'm going to go back a little bit to this idea of arguing and talk about being proactive. So with any behavior strategy, being proactive is going to be better than being reactive. In the world of Prader-Willi syndrome, it's really important about preventing and being proactive because it seems like once our kids do something once, you got it, you're done. They know they can do it again. And so if you can prevent it from ever happening, you're going to be much better. So here's what I say. Here's this operational definition. What is arguing? It looks different for everyone. So it's any statement made, and this is one definition of arguing. This is just the one I came up with a colleague. Any statement made that's to initiate a conversation and to express dissatisfaction towards something. So you always tell me to do math. I hate math. It's so stupid. So if we don't have a set plan, if we don't have a proactive plan, we give him the math, he starts arguing, we don't really know what's going to happen. It's probably going to get worse. We're probably going to argue back, and he's probably never going to learn math, but he's going to learn how to get out of it. If we have a proactive plan, we have some sort of ready-made plan that we're ready. It's outlined. We're going to have some preventative stuff in there, and then if he does argue, we're going to respond this way. These are just some examples. You could discuss the concerns. I have found, as my son's gotten older and gotten better verbal skills, that a lot of his behavior, if I take a step back and have him explain it, there's usually a misunderstanding, and then when I can explain the misunderstanding, he's fine. So a lot of his kind of OCD tantrums that I thought were just some rule number 75 that he made up that I broke, as he gained more skills, he actually was able to say kind of the irrational thought that was putting him over the edge, and then we were able to explain it back, and then we were good. So that's, if this is a student that would work for that, you could say, oh, I see you don't want to do math. Can you tell me why? You're not going to talk about it for 30 minutes. They may be able to give you a valid reason, and then you can go from there. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about positive reinforcement. Our definition of positive reinforcement is any stimulus, so that's just like a thing, that's presented after a behavior that increases the likelihood that that behavior will happen again. So positive reinforcement is a paycheck. You get a paycheck, you go back to work. The paycheck stops coming, you're not going to go back to work. So even though somebody likes something, it may not function as a reinforcer if it doesn't work to increase the behavior. And I know a lot of times with students with Prader-Willi syndrome, it can be very hard to motivate them because they just want to do what they want to do, and that's that. So we have to get super creative and think about those things. Think about those receipts. Think about those kind of interests that you think may be odd. How can you use that to motivate them? What piece of that will motivate them? I've used in the past, this actually wasn't even with my son, but we had this kid and we couldn't figure out how to motivate him, and the mom just said like he loves the UPS guy. So he just liked to open boxes. It didn't matter what was inside. So we just grabbed a bunch of junk from the classroom. It was actually at a camp. So we grabbed a bunch of stuff at camp, wrapped them up. When he did the behaviors he was supposed to do, he got to pick a present to open. And it was like a crayon and like silly little things. But it was the act of opening the box and that element of surprise, that's what was reinforcing to him. So sometimes you really got to get creative. And I just want to make a little plug here, difference between bribing and positive reinforcement, because a lot of people are like, I bribed my kid. And you might, and I probably have at times, because we all got to do what we got to do. But so positive reinforcement is systematic. It's planned, and we know it's decided beforehand. You know, when you do the math worksheet, you can have a 2-minute break. It's not, I don't want to do math. Oh, well, then you can have a break when you're done. That would be like bribing because it wasn't set up beforehand. We also know that it's going to, the positive reinforcement, the thing that's presented after is going to increase the behavior. Like we know that before we use it. So bribing is in the moment. It's like short term, and you usually don't see long-term effects from it.
I was just wondering how, then when they start associating that behavior with the reward, then how do you, is there a way to kind of break away from that? Because
Yes.
like for my daughter, she really, to go on the potty,
Yep.
we would give her screen time if she would go on the potty instead of in her pants. Then she just started saying she had to go to the potty all the time
Yep.
because she wanted to sit with the phone. If she would, and she would sometimes
Yeah.
go. But
Yeah.
then how do you like, I didn't want her to always
Right.
be.
Yeah, so it's a good. So that it's called fading. So kind of like a fading process. So you're kind of at the step. She's letting you know, like she knows how to go. She really doesn't. My son actually did the exact same thing. He would earn the wiggles if he pooped on the potty. So he started just saying he had to poop, so then he could watch the wiggles. So then you know. So then you just start. There's different ways to fade it out. Sometimes the kids fade it out on their own, but in that way you could fade it out to like every other time, or it could be a surprise, and you could have like a little fishbowl, and if she picks up a piece of paper that has a TV on it, you know, she goes to the bathroom and then she takes the paper out, and if there's like an iPhone on it, she can have the iPhone. If not, then maybe you'll get it next time. So it would fade it out slowly. So you can move it to like every other, every third, every fifth, that type of thing. So some general facts. We know that positive reinforcement is more effective at creating and maintaining behavior change over time than punishment is. And I know yesterday the behavior panel talked a lot about using positive reinforcement over punishment. And generally speaking, when you're just talking about applied behavioral analysis, this is the rule of thumb. We always go positive first. We always increase. We want to make the child to think, what can I do to get more? We don't want them thinking, what do I have to not do to not get punished? It's not really a good thing. And the research supports it. It should be delivered immediately, so kind of like she was saying, every time she goes to the bathroom, then over time you're going to fade it. So you should have a plan for fading it. You want to vary it because there's this thing called satiation. You know, everybody, I'm sure, had a favorite thing they did in college, and maybe one night there was too much of it, and now they don't like it anymore. donuts or something. But you're satiated on that because you just had too much of it and there's no need, you don't need it anymore. And that can happen to our kids as well. It can happen to any kid. So you want to make sure you have a variety of reinforcers that you can use. And always strive for them to be natural. I feel like we have an edge with a lot of our students with Prader-Willi syndrome because they seem to really love to just interact. They love people, they love reactions. So I feel like this is sometimes a little easier with our kids. They don't always need the tangible. They just want you to be happy and proud. So literally saying, you did that math, I am so proud of you. It doesn't have to be like a whole complicated ticket token M&M thing. It can literally just be that. And as long as that continues the math worksheet, then that acts as a reinforcer for that. If you do have to use some of the tangible things, you're always handing over tangible with praise, with the high five, with something, maybe like a sticker or a good grade, and then over time, by pairing them together, that natural will gain the reinforcing value and you can start taking the other one away. That's what I just said. And you want to have a plan for fading the reinforcement over time. Oops. I don't have a time. What time is it? Just how much more do I have? How much more do I have left? Sorry. Perfect. Thank you. Okay. So consistency. Anyone who's a parent knows consistency is super important. So it's definitely like one of the most important aspects. The behavior panel touched on it yesterday, basically when they talked about never giving in. So why is it so important? This is kind of dating a little bit, but did anybody used to watch that Super Nanny show? Right, and how many times did she have to put kids in that bedroom? But by the third night, the kid was sleeping by himself. It was that consistency. So it's the same thing. Keep doing it, keep doing it, keep doing it. Eventually, it's going to work. At first, it's going to get worse. Here's your little technical term, extinction burst. Things are going to get worse before they get better. With any child, you tell them no, they're going to do it. It's kind of like a guarantee, the more you tell them no. So what's happening is, well, when they gave me a math worksheet and I argued, they always take it away. But now when I argue, it's there. So maybe I have to curse at them. So I'm going to try cursing today. So I'm going to argue and curse. Oh, well, that didn't work. So I think maybe now I have to rip up my paper. So now I'm going to argue, curse, and rip up my paper. That didn't work either. So now I think I'm going to start hitting and kicking them. So that student, and I always say if you're seeing this extinction burst, it means what you're doing is working because they know you're on to them and they are aware that their behavior isn't working anymore. They're not getting what they want. So you've hit the nail on the head. You just have to stay strong to be able to work through it because they start it down here at a behavior that was maybe here and then they add. But then at some point, they're going to realize it doesn't matter what I add to it, the result is the same. I have to do math, and it's not really worth my effort to do all of this because if I would just do the math, then I would get to have my break or my whatever. The good stuff comes. Then you're going to see a decrease, and you should see if it started at this level, the decrease, it should end down lower. So it could take a couple weeks. If things are getting worse, it probably means it's working, but it's super frustrating. So don't give up because the child knows what they're doing. So you just kind of got to stay strong. And you're going to be doing other things in the moment to alleviate that extinction burst. Like in my programming, when we know we're going to have a burst, there's a lot of positive stuff going on at the same time in order to prevent that. So there would be super extra reinforcers. The math work would be less, and we'd have more access to rewards, and we'd have more breaks, and we'd have more attention to motivate them to try to keep that burst a little bit lower. And then there's this thing called intermittent reinforcement, which is why Vegas is Vegas. That's how you win at the slot machines. I won once when I was 21, and now I'm 50. I may win again. So I've been playing for 20 years. I never won again, but I might. And that's intermittent reinforcement. When a behavior gets reinforced sometimes, and you can't predict when it's going to come, but it might come. So that's where the behavior panel was saying, don't give in, don't give in, don't give in, because if you give in once, they're going to know it worked once, it's probably going to work again. So I'm just going to keep doing it. And the research shows this is the hardest type of reinforcement to get rid of. So how do you start changing maladaptive behavior? So first we have to determine the functions. So you're going to use those ABCs. We say if you can, take some data. I'm going to show you on the next slide what the data sheet would look like, and it's just a Word document. It's nothing fancy. You guys can handwrite one if you want. But you're going to use this ABC form to look for trends in the behavior. 3 days is usually kind of what we say to see if we can get something stable. sometimes more, sometimes less. So after you determine the function, you're going to find ways that you can change the antecedent and the consequence. So that's the core also of a bit of what applied behavioral analysis is. It's about using the environment to change behavior. What can I do about myself? What can I do about the environment to help this person? First, you got to start catching yourself in old habits. This is all good and dandy, and you're going to know that this behavior is for attention, and you're going to have your plan, and you're going to have a whole thing set up where we're not going to answer, and the kid's going to do it, and you're going to give them attention because it's your habit. But you're going to realize it. You're going to be like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have done that. So as time goes, you're going to start catching yourself. So you've got to catch yourself in your old habits. But over time, it's going to get better. Don't expect anyone to be able to just be able to fix behavior right away. So then you'll start fixing, and things should hopefully start to get better. And just remain consistent. Remember that extinction burst. So here's an example of what an ABC data collection sheet would look like. Like I said, it's just like from an Excel document, and I filled in too. So you want the date and the time. That's super, super important. Time. Sometimes date, definitely time. A lot of times you'll see trends in behavior based on time. There's no super clear function, and it doesn't matter what activity it is, but it's always at 11:30. This is what happens. So your plan needs to be looking at that 11:30 time. So if something always bad happens at 11:30, at 11:25, we're going to program something fun to maybe go from 11:25 to 11:40 to maybe prevent that. But time is very important. So you're going to record the antecedent. You can see this is all very observable. The math work was put on the desk. It's not says math, it was put on the desk. That might be important, maybe. So you want what you saw, the behaviors. So the behaviors are defined down below. And like I said, they're very, like aggression for the student with an open or closed fist, making or attempting to make contact with another person when not necessary for the task. That's what aggression looked like for that person. For another person, aggression could be something completely different. So the term, the word that you use is irrelevant. It's the definition that's important. So everybody is recording the same behavior. And then you record the behavior, you record what the consequence was, what happened immediately, right then. So math work was put down, there was aggression, somebody said stop, and the behavior didn't stop.
Sorry, can I just add to
Yeah.
that? Often what I see with education is that parents will come home, teachers will complain that their behavior won't stop, and the teachers will say, I've tried everything. And so as a parent, what you can say is, oh, amazing, I believe you, I trust you. Can you show me your ABC chart so we can look at that and analyze it together? And then maybe we can come up with a plan to solve that problem. Because a lot of teachers, and I know this, trust me, they don't do this.
No.
And so it's really important that you hold the teacher accountable, but work with them, don't challenge them.
Right,
So,
yeah. Good point. And just a side note, it's going to come later, but in the US, you can't take this data without parent permission. So this would be part of a functional behavior assessment. So you would want to say, do the assessment, and then you would get the data. I just wanted people to know that. But it's up there. So this is what the paper would look like, and then over time, you find trends in behavior. So how does Prader-Willi syndrome affect ABA implementation? So we know that Prader-Willi syndrome results from damage to the hypothalamus, and we know that the hypothalamus is satiety and hunger and emotional regulation and biological issues. So we know that there's an underlying genetic reason. This is a huge setting event. This is something that we need to take into account when anybody's working with someone with Prader-Willi syndrome. We've got some brain-based causes for behavior here. It's not just about function. It's about function, it's important, but this underlying tip of the iceberg is this, and this is what I really I'm trying to get the message out to lots of providers and other behavior analysts to really appreciate how important this is. We know from research that people with Prader-Willi syndrome have brain-based, they enjoy just the vision of food. Like the pleasure center is like, boom, it lights up really big. So if that's like super exciting and lights up really big, that's going to affect, how you're thinking and how you're acting, and you have to take that into account as to how that's going to affect behavior. So there's this thing, the PWS, the behavioral phenotype. So this is kind of typical. So we went out to see Dr. Gorash. I took my son out to see her before kindergarten to get like a good eval. And this was the first time I had seen this DSM diagnosis, and it made complete sense to me. So DSM-5 was just done a couple years ago, and it's this FO7, personality change due to another medical condition. So there's portions of what's going on that are out of anyone's control. So I'm not trying to say we can't help people with Prader-Willi syndrome, and I'm not saying they can't learn. They for sure can learn, and they are for sure capable of like everything. There's just some things that we need to consider and supports that may stay there forever for this reason. And we know that stress is going to increase the intensity, so that's a huge setting event for our kids. Any type of change, any type of stress. You know, my son had a change in the one-on-one that was like his lifesaver for years, so my son's doing great. He was like the fire outer aide, so then he had to go help another kid. My son plummeted. I told them, I said, I told you, I think it's this new aide, and they said, he loves her, he thinks she's great. I'm like, no, it's the change in person. That's what it is. And then we got the new guy back and things were good. And people with PWS typically respond better to antecedent interventions than consequence interventions. They're gonna do a lot better if the environment is set up for them. That's the whole food security piece that we know about. That's why that works. But we're gonna be better on antecedent than consequence. There should still be some sort of consequence, and like the behavior panel was talking about, like a natural and neutral type of thing. But these like harsh punishments for a variety of reasons, they're not gonna work. They're actually gonna increase the stress, and it's gonna be more likely that they're gonna misbehave. So here's some examples of antecedent intervention. So the food security is the big one. Oh no, this isn't the updated slide. I actually just recently talked with Dr. Gorash, and that other slide isn't in there, sorry. All right, I'll tell you guys where to find it. So they used to say no hope, no doubt, no disappointment, but they found that the no hope piece was too hard and too harsh for some of their patients with Prader-Willi syndrome. So they say no doubt, no chance, no disappointment. That's their new kind of motto. But this just kind of sets it out. Basically, it was that there's no hope for extra food, but there is no doubt that you're going to get fed, and then you end up with no disappointment. That's pretty much what we were doing. And the first time I heard her speak, my son was about 5. And I was like, oh my God, that's what we're doing. This is great. I'm glad I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. You can do explicit teaching of coping skills. There's this one program called Zones of Regulation. I'm not endorsing it. I don't make any money from it. There's other coping programs out there. This one's just very straightforward, very black and white, and can be pretty effective and help our students understand behaviors you should and shouldn't do. And when I'm feeling this way, what are things that are, how can I replace my inappropriate behavior? What can I do to make myself feel better and calm? Explicitly teach social skills, warn about changes, just like a lot of the stuff Dr. Woodcock was talking about, but often not too far in advance, because then you're going to hear about it for the next month. So as much as you can handle. Use of visual schedules, and visual schedules are meant to teach flexibility. So you have the schedule for the day, and it's just like what Dr. Woodcock was saying. You have the schedule for the day, but basically it's just saying the order, and you want your child to learn that the order might change sometimes, but that's okay. There's still going to be an order, and there's still going to be something to do. So in the morning, you're going to say, these are the things we're going to do, and you should initially plan change. So it's going to rain, so you put the park on there on purpose, because it's going to rain, and then you look at the weather app or something, and you say, oh no, it's going to rain today. And you take a little sticker that says like, oops, and you put the oops over the playground. We can't go to the playground, but we can do movies or mall or whatever. We're going to replace it with something else, and that's going to help them understand change a little bit. Non-contingent access to preferred activities throughout the day. This is another one that seems to be pretty effective for kids with Prader-Willi syndrome that isn't often implemented behaviorally. I know personally, once I got the school team to understand this and they put this in for my son, it made a huge difference in his behavior and willing to work at school. Typically, we're all about earn. Got to do this, got to get that. Typically, for someone with Prader-Willi syndrome, that's just, they want to please, and it creates more stress. I have to earn all this stuff all day. So they have to earn some things. They've got to behave, they've got to earn, but then doesn't matter what happens and what you do, you're still going to get your 10-minute puzzles. Or, so he really didn't like math, so they started math with something fun, did math. It didn't matter what happened during math, he played a game at the end. And it wasn't necessarily a math game, and he was all of a sudden fine with math once he knew that fun game was coming. You want to embed control throughout the day, add choices as much as you can, give them a sense of control, access to calming breaks, use specific concrete language. Tell them to turn off the light. Don't say go flip the light, because they probably will go flip the lamp that's standing. So say go turn off the light. You want rules to be clear and consistent. And this one-on-one assistant, this is one that's a little bit different when we think about students in an educational environment and one-on-ones. The goal typically is to start with a one-on-one, and you have this plan of getting rid of them and the student to be independent and to live without them. Oftentimes, for someone with Prader-Willi syndrome, that's not their reality. I'm not saying for everyone, I'm not up here saying no one can live, it's all gonna vary, but it often is not their reality. And it often is that person, so just knowing that there's a person there that understands their roles. I know personally for my son, he just gets worried that somebody's gonna try to feed him something he can't have. But if he knows there's somebody, at least one person there that will advocate for him, he's okay. So it's kind of like that security blanket. But having that one-on-one there, I always said, when he was in kindergarten and they put the one-on-one in the IEP, I said, I want the one-on-one to be a fly on the wall. There needs to be somebody there watching him at all times, but they still need to give him some independence and they move in and out. But we've learned that oftentimes, just having that level of support, having that person there really helps. And that's different. You can use positive reinforcement systems. You want to have low expressed emotion in response to problem behavior. Again, the attention, and just kind of keep your distance as much as you can when people are agitated. So then there's this thing called survival mode, I think we've all seen. I agree with the behavior panel, consistency, consistency, consistency. However, there's life. Like, I'm gonna tell you not to give in, but it's gonna happen, so don't beat yourself up. Like, that's what I wanna say. Don't beat yourself up. Don't think you're a horrible parent or a horrible person because you shouldn't have given your kid, bought that toy, but you had to buy that toy to get them out of the store because they're too big to pick up, or you just were so uncomfortable of all those people staring at you, you had to get out of it, right? You did it, don't beat yourself up, but learn from it. How can I prevent that from happening next time? So there is survival mode. Believe me, I've had to do things like that. It is what it is. But you want to try to learn and prevent it next time. And I love this phrase. This woman, Barbara Haas-Givler, she's another board-certified behavior analyst in Pennsylvania. And this is her she used to work in Elwyn homes for people with Prader-Willi syndrome. She knows a lot about it. She's phenomenal. Her message is respect the Prader-Willi syndrome. And I just think that's perfect because you have to respect it and take into account in order to make your changes behaviorally. So I want to talk a little bit about the difference between what a behavior specialist is and what a behavior analyst is, because there are some pretty significant differences that people don't know. So a behavior specialist is just kind of somebody who has a job that's going to help with behavior. In some states, in order for insurance, there are some criteria that you have to be a licensed behavior specialist, but that criteria in most places it's not very high, and it's nothing compared to what you have to do to become a board-certified behavior analyst. So as you can see, it's kind of just generic. You have to have some experience with kids and behavior, and you can call yourself a behavior specialist. Behavior analyst is, you want to see those BCBA behind their name. It means board certified behavior analyst. It means you have at least a master's degree in a related field. We've completed specific grad courses in applied behavioral analysis. We've completed, it's close to like 2,000 hours of supervised field work in behavior analysis, and a lot of that was sitting down with a supervisor, answering your questions, critiquing you, making sure you're doing it right. Then you have to take and pass a board exam, which is no fun. And it's the same criteria across the world. So BCBA in the US is the same as one in Canada, is the same as one anywhere. It's all the same criteria. And if there's a D behind it, it means they have a PhD. But the rest of it's pretty much the same. And this BACB.com is the board that is the certifying board. So if you ever have information, and you can go on that board and search for local BCBAs near you. So how can ABA principles be used? So like I said, the beauty is that it's flexible. So in a school, there's a variety of ways. You can be in an ABA classroom where they're really intense and they're doing this one-on-one work and they're taking data and they're doing their work and there's a BCBA in there. It could also be that your student's in a gen ed, your child's in gen ed all day, and there's, like I consult, so there's a board-certified behavior analyst that observes and gives tips to the teacher on how to kind of tweak their teaching with behavior analytic techniques to make sure the student's really learning the best way. Your student could have a behavior support plan. Should be written by a BCBA, but it doesn't have to be. They could go back and forth between like a special ed or regular ed and ABA classroom to get some of that. Their one-on-one could be a registered behavior technician, which just means that somebody, they went through about 40 hours of coursework from a BCBA, and they have more knowledge than just a general one-on-one. Out in the community, you could have like a traditional home program where you have a provider that comes to your house, works with your child so many hours a week, and a tech works with them. The BCBA supervises a couple times a month, and they take the data, and it's very systematic. But they should be giving you training so that they're telling you what they're doing so you can do it when they're gone. You as a parent, because it is really hard, I couldn't get in-home ABA services for my own child until a year ago. Like, it wasn't possible. I do it for a living, I do it for other people. I couldn't get it for him because of insurance, because of the state, because of everything. So you can use these principles, you can use this ABC just throughout your life. So that's where I'm saying you don't have to be in an ABA program to be using the ABA philosophy throughout the day. You could possibly, because if your insurance doesn't cover and you can't get it through the state, it's not a cheap service if you're paying out of pocket. But you could possibly maybe have just the BCBA come, if you feel like you're pretty involved, you just need a tip here or there. Maybe somebody could come once a month or twice a month and just kind of sit with you as a parent and do some parent trainings. And then there's some clinic programs where you just take your child to the clinic, and it's like what you do in the home, but it's just in a clinic. So what is a functional behavior assessment? So it's a systematic way of isolating those antecedents and those consequences. So the point of an FBA is to figure out the function of behavior. And then we create a plan. So in the law, school districts are required to do FBAs under certain circumstances, and not everybody realizes this. So some of the circumstances or the factors to consider is, if a child does or doesn't have a disability, if they've been removed from school for more than 10 days, an FBA needs to be done. If there's any behavior that involves, serious bodily damage or weapons, you need to do an FBA. They're often done if you're looking at moving into a more restrictive setting. You'll do an FBA first to see if you can do it where you're at. Parent permission is required. It is required to do an FBA. The language in the law is very general. Anybody can do one. They just have to have training. That's it. Legally speaking, a teacher can conduct an FBA, a school psychologist. If you can get a BCBA to do it, we just have a lot of training in that, and that's ultimate, but it's not your legal right. But what I'm going to show you is what an FBA should look like. So you might be in a school system that you get an FBA done, and it's the teacher or the school psychologist. Yeah.
For every time like a student injures another student that's in special education, do they have
No. That's like the first time, really. I should clarify that. So if you have an active behavior plan with an FBA and like aggression and injuring others is known. If there's not one in place? Yeah. Oh, yes. For the initial, yes. When it starts happening, yes. You should get one done. That's a reason when they should consider it. And yeah, it's a reason to ask. And when you ask for one as a parent, so when you request, Tony's going to go through that. I don't want to steal. But when you request one, it initiates the reevaluation process. So in writing, you request for an FBA. Within 10 days, they need to respond to you with a yes or a no. And that yes would be the form that you sign for the permission. And then they have 60 days it depends on your state, but you have about 60 days to do it. And then about another 30 to write the IEP based on that. So if you get an FBA and you're not sure if it's good or not, I want you to use this checklist. So the behavior should be clearly defined. There shouldn't be any emotion words when those behaviors are defined. You should be able to see it, and everybody should know what they are. There could be an interview with teachers and parents. You want to identify strengths and weaknesses. You want to find times of the day this happens. Anything that can help the assessment tailor to really look at what's going on. Then there's actual data. There needs to be numbers. There needs to be graphs. You can use some rating scales where teachers fill out it happens at this time of the day and you get an idea on function. But if I didn't see it, it didn't happen. That's the basic philosophy. There needs to be actual hard data. This behavior across 3 days occurred 17 times, occurred 2 times. You need numbers. That is super important. Then you use all of that information, you look for trends, you find the function, there should be a hypothesis statement that has the setting, the behavior, and the maintaining function. And one behavior, this is what's really important, and I'm always surprised still, even when I find this, when we do these assessments, as one behavior can function for multiple reasons under multiple circumstances. This is why FBAs are so important, because we're looking at the environment. Behavior is based on what's going on in the environment. So at one point, there could be a certain person that always gives attention for inappropriate behavior. So when I take my data, I find out that this student only hits people. There's only one person that student hits. It's one specific assistant, and everybody could have guessed it because that person is always like touching them, giving them attention. So we know in that situation, they're hitting that person to get attention. So we're going to intervene based on that. But when they're given the math worksheet, then they want to escape the work. So in that situation, we're going to have a different intervention. We're going to maintain the work versus teach them how to get attention. So it's super important for that. And then there should be recommendations for intervention. So the whole behavior plan won't be written there if they think it's significant and requires a plan. And the interventions need to be based on function. And they shouldn't be all 4 functions. I can't tell you how many times I inherit students and it says, this student engages in hitting in order to escape and get attention and maintain sensory intervention. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. Like, I need more information. So if you're seeing statements that have one behavior and like 2, 3, 4 functions, you need to come back and say, you need to do this again. So this is where your school's going to do it, and if it's a good one, then that's awesome, because definitely schools can do good ones. I think my schools do, hopefully, do good ones. But you can use this to say, you know what, you're missing this, 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 and this. I want to request an outside eval. I need you to contract a local BCBA to come in and do this. And you have your framework for it. You're not just a parent saying, I think I want more. I want to cause trouble. So you have your reason. And then you create the positive behavior support plan from that. So these are some good resources. So obviously we all know Elizabeth Roof. So Barbara Haas-Givler is who I referenced earlier. Her thing is the genetic underpinnings of behavior. She works at ADMI Geisinger in Pennsylvania, which is where I'm from. And she does offer this website. The Geisinger offers consultative services. And they do Prader-Willi, like they'll do child-specific. They'll train school staff or they'll observe the child and things like that. So they can help with that. People have probably heard of Dr. B.J. Goff. She's up in New England. She's a very good resource. Pittsburgh Partnership, that's an excellent website. I print off a lot of their papers when my son goes to new places because they have really good handouts about just the genetic piece and the brain piece and just keeping things low. So I really like them. Behavior Babe is an ABA website. So it's not a Prader-Willi site. It's a really good ABA site that's very parent-friendly. They've got a blog. I pulled some of my information from here. The Rights Law one is a quick, like, what is an FBA? It's a very parent-friendly, what is it? How should it be done? It's a nice little thing. And then this last little one is called selfandmatch.com, which is it's an evidence-based self-monitoring system. And it's just a good website to go and get an idea of, what is self-monitoring? How does that work? And it's research-based, and I shared that website with my son's school, and they ended up bringing those people in, training the entire district, and they now use this in their school system, and it's been really effective. So it's a good way, like a positive reinforcement system. And I just thank some of these people for, Elizabeth Roof, she's helped me some bit with this, and Barbara Givler. Tyler Washburn is a colleague, and then actually Dr. Goresh as well. That was supposed to be on there, but she helped me a little bit with this too. So that's that. I don't know, are we good on time or? Okay, sure. I have no idea. Oh. Go ahead, you want to shout? Yeah. You're welcome.
You mentioned about ignoring behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me what that looks like?
Sure. Do you have an example?
Yeah, psychologists tell me to do that. So when I say to them, I'm ignoring you now,
Right.
I hated to just
Right.
completely quiet. He got so upset. Then
Okay.
somebody else told me, well, you're still giving me attention by saying I'm ignoring
You are. Yeah.
So can you please tell me what's
Sure. So in your situation, that might be I just want to clear up. So it's kind of like your child's worked up and you're trying to remove attention so they can just calm down, right? Yeah, so just walk away. Like, don't say anything, don't do anything. Keep an eye. So for safety reasons, you want to keep an eye. So if your focus is just that a lot of times when people are escalated and you start talking to them, it's going to escalate them more. We just want to keep that down. So a lot of times it's just the time. I know as people get into their kind of meltdowns and they hit a certain phase, it doesn't matter what you do, they have to run the course of the meltdown. And the more you intervene, the worse it's going to get. Like, think about it when you're worked up and somebody tries to rationalize with you, you just want to punch them. Our kids actually do punch us. It's the same thing. So yeah, so just make sure your child's in a safe spot, and literally just don't, because if you say I'm ignoring you, you're not. Yeah.
Okay, so I have a 13-year-old son, and I just want, my experience with the whole FBA, BCBA thing was that because I didn't know the terms to ask for, and this is just for the other parents who have younger kids, it took me 5 years to get a reasonable FBA and then the BCBA, and then I had to actually literally take them to what I call school courts to get a BCBA to do the plan to carry it out. And even the follow through on it, the one thing I was going to ask a question about, so I guess what I'm trying to say is if you are wanting one of these at the school district, just use the term FBA and BCBA, otherwise you're not going to get either of those.
Yeah,
and that's two different.
You're exactly right. I'm not surprised that's how long that took. That's part of the reason I want to get this information out, because I hear that way too often. Go ahead,
it's so frustrating. And then regarding this, the gathering of the data, what I find is for my son, and his aide sees this as well, that there's typically a setting event, I didn't know what to call it till you said that sets him up for a terrible day. And so when they collect the data, the BCBA wants her to do the antecedent, but does not want her to put in anything that is further time-wise than a few minutes right before the event. So I find that to be limiting.
So
what do you find?
When you do take the data, you could see when I showed you the ABC chart, there was no room for setting events. A lot of my sheets, I'll have like a comment section on the side in case people want to add that. But they're definitely important to note, and possibly sharing this information that what we know about Prader-Willi syndrome is that those setting events are really, really a big piece of it. Yeah, it's hard because they occur so far in the future. Sometimes they could, or in the past, they could have been days prior.
Yeah.
But they're super important. So you do need to take that into account.
Just real quick, your deck is very useful and full of resources. Is it available anywhere?
I don't know.
Can you make it available somewhere?
The slides. Yeah. Sure. I don't. Yeah, I think we're good.
Look for communications coming out post-conference. We have all of these recordings that are going to be made available, and any slides that are available will get pushed back out to you guys. Keep the Hoop app.
Yeah, right. There's also a blog that I've been doing for PWS USA that is basically this presentation in short snippets. So I put one out that just explained this. So if you're like, it's on their website. I don't know when the next one's coming out. It should be soon, I guess, but it'll be very similar information as well, so you can look out for that.
So we have a daughter, she's 12 years old, just started 7th grade. So she's been coming home crying a lot. And so is it appropriate for me to ask for an FBA? Because she holds it together at school, but when she gets home, she's starting to cry. She's let her grandmother know, I'm miserable.
Yeah.
I'm at a point now where I'm thinking, do we keep her in the school system?
Right.
But
that's difficult, so it's a good question. In order for an FBA to be done, there has to be an observable behavior to measure. So if there's it depends. So what I would do is, I don't know if you're talking to the school or if you've had meetings with them or if they're aware of this, but probably sit down first and talk and just say, there may be some behaviors that are happening at school that you don't know about that they may think are minor, but you can't really do an FBA if there's nothing to measure. So if all you're seeing is the crying when she gets home, I don't think an FBA is going to solve your problem, but I do think you need to look at and see if she can give you more specific information, sit down with the school, and talk about, what's going on. And then there might be something that comes up that you're like, oh, she doesn't do that behavior at home, or basically if a behavior is interfering with the student's ability to learn or participate in school activities, or others, then that behavior could warrant an FBA. So if there is something that maybe it's taking her a long time to start her work, they could look at that, like avoiding of the work. But yeah, you're gonna have to dig a little bit more because they're gonna have to have something to measure.
We have time for one last question. If anyone, have we worn you out? Are you ready for lunch?
Cindy, that was amazing. Like
Oh,
everything
thank you.
you talked about is so helpful for families, and I think the hardest part as a mom is that you don't know all the background stuff that's happening in education, and so thanks for empowering us.
Oh, you're
That
welcome.
was really good.
Thank you. Yes, thank you all.
So thank you, Cindy, so much.
You're welcome.
We are